Well, I got to give airframes a B- on this airframe, I guess. I was pretty happy with the airframe in general, but there's a lot of little nickel dime things on here that just are not quite right. I just spent a lot of time going over that front attach fitting there for the landing gear attach fitting for those blocks for the floats, and that wasn't anywhere close to being right. You couldn't just bolt up a landing gear on there. The gear, unless maybe the airframe's incorporated gears of their own, would fit up on there, but a standard Cub gear wouldn't fit in there. And then that wire pull there that's welded on the fuselage, that was too thick a metal there. That took some work getting it down. Now I'm running into this. I've had these pads put in here for the water rudder pulley cables, and the first thing that I noticed on these was that the holes were too close together. These are pretty much standard brackets for the water rudder pulleys here. I've got a whole bunch of them that came off of different floats, and they're all the same. They're all a uniform width here. They're almost identical, pretty darn close to being identical. Well, they wouldn't fit up between these bolts. I've got eye bolts in here for them to fit up into, and they wouldn't fit up in there. It was close, but they wouldn't slide in there. I had to take a crescent wrench and bend these bolts out a little bit on each one of them to get it to fit. And you want them to fit loose. You want them to be able to pivot on there. At first I had them tight, and that's not right. You don't want them tight. You want them so that they can pivot. Just a little chintzy 2-bit thing that could have been right, and it wasn't. It's almost right, but not quite. But the other thing about these is they're too far back. They're right parallel with the back end of the floats here. So the flying wire, or the rudder cables, now go straight across back there. I'm going to have to go up forward with the pulleys there and bring them back for the water rudders for steering. They should have been up here another 2 feet or better. And then of course I wanted a pad put in for the carry-through cable for the rudders, the cable that runs from one water rudder around to the other one, the drag cable, carry-through cable, whatever. Well, they give me a pad up there, but it's only got one bolt in it, so you can't put a pulley in it like this. I'm going to have to figure something else out for that. Anyway, you add this together with the landing gear attach fittings not being quite right, and then when I put the jack screw in back there for the tail, the bushings on that weren't lined up right. Really, I guess a B- is being generous with them when you consider that they didn't put the brackets in for the aileron cables there in the fuselage, and I had to get them to send me brackets for them and a jig to put them in with, and then grind off all my old powder coat paint and everything and weld them in myself. So that would even drop it down a little bit farther. So all in all, it's pretty good, but some of this stuff is just irritating as hell. It's frustrating that you pay that much money for something that's supposed to be precision, and you got all kinds of little nickel dime things like that. I just did a rant on how bad the quality control on some of this stuff on this airframe is. All in all, mostly it's pretty good, but there's some little nickel dime things that just could be better, just not as good up to the standards you'd think they should be. I was kind of triggered by this water rudder control pulley here, and the fact that I couldn't get this bracket lined up in there between those bolts. It's just one of those little things that shouldn't be. And after fighting with wire pulls on the fuselage and the landing gear attach fittings and a few other things, it just kind of triggered me. So I just went over to the other side and put that bracket on the other side, and it just fit up in there perfectly. That really just kind of proves my point. I want to go ahead and put these water rudders on as part of setting up these steering cables for the water rudders. I'm going to use the ones that came off of these floats. These were the 172 ones. My other ones are in pretty good shape, except for down here, these cross tubes here where the water rudders themselves pivot on. The bushings in there are pretty well shot. I want to be able to work on those, maybe make new bushings for them, and I think these clamps right up here are pretty rusty. I probably should see if I can get some new ones and put on there. Otherwise they're in pretty good shape. But I'm going to go ahead and use these ones that came off of these floats. Now the other water rudders were set up with a number 6 bolt in them. I just drilled them out, and I'd made plastic bushings to go in each one of them. And this one has a plastic bushing in the top fitting here, and I think a steel bushing here on the bottom one. This is a real sore spot on these. This is back in the salt water. It's always down in the water, almost submerged a lot of the time, and gets water over the top of it. Even when the airplane is out on the ramp, out on the pullout, they still are down there real close to the water, and you just really can't get to them. I wash it down with fresh water, but it's just hard to get around to the back of them and get these cleaned up. So what I've done on these, I've taken a number 5 bolt, 5/16 bolt. This happens to be a number 10. Will go in the top one, and I'll need a longer one to go in the bottom one. Now, this is what I do on those. I drilled them out and drilled the shank out, and then drilled them out on the side here, so I can take a grease gun with a point on it and stick down in here and grease these periodically. So that'll help a lot with those. Keeping them from freezing up again like they did before. So I'll grease the hell out of those, put them all together, and then I'll be able to grease them, like I said, periodically. I got both those rudder posts mounted up there. I put an AN 365 nut on there and a washer. They're stainless steel, of course, because the bolts were stainless steel. I tightened them up enough so that the bolts pivot in the bushings there, and the post itself does not pivot on the bushings. That'll cause the hole to wear out on the post if it pivots on the bushings. Of course, I put it all together with lots of grease in it. Now these fortunately were marked left and right. So even though they look identical, these horns on here are angled a little bit different on the posts. You can see how that one, I don't know whether you can see that or not, but that one is, this leg here is in farther than this leg here. Left one is just the opposite. On this now, there's a rubber block that goes in this little fork right here, in this little bracket right here. That's a bumper stop for the water rudders. And then there's a bolt goes through here and goes through the fork on the water rudders, the pivot fork. And then the water rudder retract cable hooks up here, goes down and hooks on the water rudder, and that's what pulls it up and down. It pivots on this point here. And the steering control cables will attach here on the outside of this control arm. The one will come from an arm there on the tail post, or on the tail steering fork, and it'll come from the left side of the tail steering fork, go through those pulleys, and then come back to this one here. The other side, the left side, will be just the opposite. We'll have the cable will cross over from the right rudder and go over to the left rudder post on the float, and then this cable here, this horn here, will hook up a drag or carry-through cable so that it keeps them balanced, a balance cable, whatever you want to call it. Well, I wasn't going to mount the water rudders themselves up for a little while because they hang back here quite a ways, and then they hang down, of course, when they're not retracted, and they bounce on the floor and stuff. When I get the cables to do the rigging on them, I have to put the rudders on so that I can line them up and get the cable tensions correct. I got these pulleys set up on both floats, the left hand and the right hand float for the water rudder steering. This will be the one that goes up to the rudder, the cable, and comes back to the water rudder post, and this will be the drag cable, carry-through cable. That'll go up forward and attach into the pulley that mounts farther up on the fuselage of the airplane. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do there because there's only one nut plate welded on to the fuselage for this drag cable, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do there to mount that up. So while I was doing this, I was thinking about it, and I come up with several different ideas. But one I finally came up with was this. I got a piece of this stainless steel. I think this is 20 gauge. This is some leftover stock that was cut off from making that air box for the cabin heater. I was originally thinking about taking that and taking a bolt, a number 4 bolt, which is because that's what goes in that nut there that's on the fuselage, and bolting up in there. But that wouldn't work because the cable comes from back here, and so it has to angle. I was trying to figure something out how to do that, to make it pivot. Finally, what I decided to do was to take a couple of these eye bolts. I think they're AN 43s, I'm not sure. Anyway, these are the standard eye bolts that you buy like this. This is what I put in on those other brackets there where they mount up for the main steering cable. And this will go into the fuselage then like that. And I'd got another one. Actually, I happen to have a smaller one, a 3/16 one instead of a 1/4 inch one. And I put it in this hole here. I folded up that sheet metal and mounted the pulley in it. And then I put that 3/16 eye bolt in there. And I've got it in there so it's just loose. It's tightened up to a point where it's not sloppy, but it's just loose enough that it'll turn so it can pivot. And then I'll put this bolt up into the fuselage and then put them together with a clevis pin, and that way this thing can pivot back at an angle like this, whatever needs to when I get the cables on there, and it also rotate like this as necessary. Well, anyway, that's what I come up with. That's the next thing to do, is to put this one in. I'll put this eye bolt in there, and then I'll connect these two together. Well, there's the drag cable pulley installed. Works as designed. It pivots this way real good. It pivots this way real good. So that should work. That should work pretty good. Next thing I have to work on now is on the rudder itself, hooking up back there. And I've got the bar bolted up on there now. Just need to get the springs out, turnbuckles and stuff. Got a pretty good start here.